Once upon a time, the entire world spoke the same language. Everyone understood one another perfectly. There were no cultural barriers, no divisions, just one people with one voice and one dream. In those early days after the Great Flood, the world was still fresh, washed clean by the waters that had once covered the earth. The ground smelled of new beginnings, and the rivers ran clear and strong. It was a time of peace, renewal, and hope. From the family of Noah came a new generation, his sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and from them, the nations of the earth began to grow once more. The children of their children multiplied across valleys and plains, filling the world again with laughter, song, and the sound of hammer and harvest. As they journeyed eastward, the people discovered a wide and fertile plain, a vast stretch of land between two mighty rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. The sun shone brightly on its rich soil, and its open fields promised a home for many. The place was called Shinar, the land that would one day be known as Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. When they reached the plain, they looked around at the endless horizon and said to one another, "This is good. Let us settle here." And so, they did. They built their homes from the clay of the ground, planted seeds, and watched their crops rise tall. Families grew large, herds multiplied, and villages began to spread across the plain. Humanity seemed to be thriving once again. But in that prosperity, something began to stir in their hearts. It started small, a spark of pride, a whisper of ambition. The same old desire that had once led Eve to reach for the forbidden fruit and Cain to raise his hand against his brother. It was the desire to be great without God. The plain of Shinar was beautiful, but it was missing something crucial: stones. Unlike the mountains where Noah's Ark had once rested, there were no solid rocks here to build with. But the people, now clever and inventive, refused to let that stop them. They discovered something new, that clay, when shaped and baked, could become stronger than stone. They molded bricks from the earth and fired them in great kilns until they hardened and glowed with strength. And instead of mortar, they found tar and bitumen bubbling from the ground, thick, black, and sticky. They used it to seal the bricks together like glue. This was more than a discovery. It was a breakthrough, a moment of human innovation that made them feel unstoppable. "Look at what our hands can do," they said proudly. "We can build anything." Encouraged by this new power, their leaders called the people together. "Come," they said, "let us build ourselves a city, with a tower that reaches to the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, so that we will not be scattered over the face of the whole earth." It sounded noble. It sounded glorious. But hidden within those words was rebellion. You see, God had already given humanity a command after the flood: be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. But the people of Shinar refused. They wanted to stay together, not to honor God, but to establish their own strength, their own security, their own legacy. They feared being forgotten. They feared insignificance. They feared the loss of their identity. And in that fear, pride took root. Brick by brick, the dream took form. What began as a village turned into a great city. Streets were drawn in straight lines. Foundations were laid deep in the ground. And in the heart of the city, they began to raise the tower. At first, it was just a tall building, wide at the base, narrow at the top. But as the structure grew, so did their ambition. The work became an obsession. The sound of hammering and shouting echoed through the air day and night. The people worked as one, united by one goal: to touch the sky. The tower rose higher and higher, tier upon tier, reaching like a mountain made by human hands. Dust filled the air as builders shouted commands, children carried water, and men climbed wooden scaffolds into the clouds. The city beneath it pulsed with life, merchants trading goods, craftsmen shaping bricks, women cooking by the fires, laughter mingling with labor. But at the center of it all stood that rising monument, the Tower of Babel, humanity's first skyscraper, the proud symbol of human ambition. And as it grew taller, the people began to forget the one who gave them breath. They spoke less of God and more of themselves. They praised the tower. They praised their skill. They praised their own hands. They said, "Look at what we have done. Look how high we've come." But the higher they climbed, the further their hearts drifted from heaven. Up there, in the quiet of eternity, God watched. He saw the city, he saw the tower, he saw the pride swelling in the hearts of men and women who believed they no longer needed him. They were united, yes, but not in truth, not in love, and not in faith. Their unity was born of pride. And pride always comes before a fall. So as the dust of progress rose from the plains of Shinar, a storm was brewing in heaven, a decision that would change the course of human history forever. Because what they were building wasn't just a tower of brick and tar. It was a monument to self, a declaration of independence from the very God who had given them life. From sunrise to sunset, the plain trembled with the sound of human achievement. Children carried baskets of clay, men lifted heavy bricks, and women mixed tar until their hands were black and blistered. Dust floated like smoke in the golden light of day, and the tower cast a long shadow over the city, a reminder of how far they had come, and how far they still dared to go. Every morning, the foreman shouted orders. Every evening, fires burned high as new bricks hardened in the kilns. The people no longer spoke of God's mercy after the flood. They spoke instead of their progress, their greatness, their destiny. The leader of the builders stood proudly at the topmost platform one afternoon, looking out over the plain. Below him, thousands of people moved like ants in perfect rhythm. He smiled. "This," he said, "is what unity can do. We have become unstoppable. Soon our tower will touch the heavens." And the people cheered. The words echoed up the tower's spiraling steps, rising like incense to the clouds. But in heaven, another voice spoke, the voice of the Almighty. The Lord looked down upon the city and the tower that the children of men were building. It wasn't that he feared their strength. No, nothing on earth could rival his power. But he saw where this path would lead, a world united, not in love or faith, but in rebellion. A humanity convinced that they were gods themselves. So the Lord said, "Behold, they are one people, and they all speak the same language. This is only the beginning of what they will do. If they remain this way, nothing they plan will be restrained. Come, let us go down and confuse their language, so that they will not understand one another's speech." And so heaven moved. The wind shifted across the plain, a strange hush falling over the city. The fires flickered, the air grew still. The builders paused, tools in hand, glancing at each other with unease. Then it happened. A mason at the base of the tower called out for bricks. But the man beside him frowned, tilting his head. He didn't understand. The foreman shouted again, louder this time, and the worker answered back in sounds that made no sense at all. A ripple of confusion spread like wildfire. One shouted for water, another for mortar, but the words came out twisted, unfamiliar. Each man thought the other was mocking him. Voices rose, tempers flared. Hammers clattered to the ground, ropes were dropped, buckets spilled. The rhythm of the city shattered in a single moment. No one could understand. Across the plain, the noise grew, shouting, arguing, desperate cries for order. But the more they spoke, the more they realized they had lost what once made them one. Mothers called to their children in fear, but even their little ones answered in strange new words. Neighbors tried to help one another, but their gestures were met with blank stares. Frustration turned into panic. Panic turned into anger. Bricks tumbled from trembling hands. The tower, that proud monument to unity, stood frozen mid-construction, a skeleton of ambition reaching into a silent sky. In the chaos, groups began to form. Men and women gathered with those they could still understand. Some discovered that they shared the same speech, others found no one at all who spoke like them. The tower became a battlefield of voices, hundreds of languages being born in a single day. The noise was deafening. The laughter and pride that had once filled the city were replaced by confusion and sorrow. Days passed, and the once glorious tower stood frozen in eerie silence. The chants that had filled the sky were gone. The laughter, the singing, the rhythmic pounding of stone against stone, everything had stopped. What remained was the haunting echo of confusion. People wandered aimlessly around the half-built tower, speaking words no one else understood. Frustration filled the air like a thick fog. One man would point toward a pile of stones, shouting what seemed like directions, but the listener would only frown, shake his head, and respond in strange syllables. Another would try to call for help, but his closest friend would only stare back in bewilderment. The builders who had once worked in perfect unity were now divided by something as simple, and as powerful, as language. The tower that was meant to reach heaven now stood as a monument of unfinished dreams and human pride. Some tried to persist. They gathered small groups of those who could understand them. Tiny pockets of familiar tongues amid a sea of confusion. They attempted to continue building, but it was no use. Without unity, there was no direction. Without shared understanding, there was no progress. Eventually, one by one, they gave up. The great project that had once united humanity was abandoned. The city of Babel, once alive with ambition, became a place of scattering. As the people drifted apart, they began to move in all directions, north, south, east, and west, each group following the few who spoke their tongue. They carried what they could: tools, livestock, pieces of memory. Some followed rivers, others crossed mountains and plains. And slowly, the world began to spread out. New tribes were born. New languages became new identities. New lands became new homes. What had once been one voice was now a chorus of many, each different, each beautiful in its own way, yet forever carrying the lesson of Babel in their hearts. God had not destroyed them out of cruelty. He had done it to remind them of something greater, that unity without humility leads to ruin. That strength without purpose can become dangerous. And that every dream, no matter how high it aims, must be built on the foundation of obedience and reverence. Years later, as generations passed, the ruins of Babel were buried under sand and silence. But the story was never forgotten. Parents told their children about the great tower that once tried to touch the heavens. They spoke of the moment when language itself was born out of human pride. And in the quiet, God watched over his scattered creation, not in anger, but in patience. He knew that one day, in the fullness of time, he would restore unity again, not through bricks and mortar, but through spirit and truth. That day would come when hearts, not tongues, would speak the same language of love and faith. The wind howls through the abandoned plains where the tower once stood. Stones lie scattered, covered in dust, half buried in the earth. The sun sets low, casting a golden light over the land. In that moment, it almost looks beautiful, the ruins of human pride shimmering beneath the sky they once tried to reach. It's a reminder. A reminder that we are not meant to build monuments for our own glory, but to build lives that honor God's design. Because every time we try to rise above him, we eventually fall beneath the weight of our own ambition. But every time we choose humility, love, and obedience, we rise higher than any tower could ever reach. The story of Babel isn't just ancient history. It's a mirror held up to every generation. We build towers too, towers of success, reputation, wealth, influence. We tell ourselves it's all for good, but deep down, sometimes it's about proving we can do it without God. And then, when things fall apart, when communication breaks, when unity fades, we realize how fragile our towers really were. God still scatters our pride so he can gather our hearts. He still confuses our plans so he can realign our purpose. Because what he wants most is not a world of tall buildings, but a world of humble hearts. The true tower that reaches heaven is not made of stone. It's made of surrender. One truth remains clear. Unity is powerful, but only when it's built on love, truth, and obedience. The people of Babel had the right desire for togetherness, but the wrong foundation. And in God's mercy, he stopped them before their pride destroyed them completely. Sometimes, the breaking of a dream is the saving of a soul. And so, the Tower of Babel fell, not by fire, not by flood, but by confusion. Yet out of that confusion came something beautiful: diversity, culture, and the reminder that only through God can humanity truly be one again. Because one day, the scattered voices of the earth would once again sing in harmony. Not to glorify themselves, but to glorify the one who gave them breath. And that, perhaps, was the lesson Babel was meant to teach us all. When we build without God, our efforts crumble. When we walk without humility, our unity dissolves. But when we trust, obey, and honor him first, our lives become a masterpiece of his purpose. Let every stone we lift, every dream we build, and every plan we make begin with this prayer. Lord, may it not be for my glory, but yours. Because in the end, it's not how high our towers stand, it's how deeply our hearts bow.